an image of Las Vegas where the NAB show took place. So is it Plato versus Sin City? We're going to discuss the philosophical questions of death, meaning, purpose, society, self, reality, religion, and morality as they apply to the NAB show. So let's start with death. This is an image of the new Blackmagic Studio camera. It looks basically like a viewfinder with a lens attached. There's practically no room between the lens mount and the viewfinder. It's either an HDTV camera or even a 4K camera. We'll discuss more about that in a moment. But look down at the bottom left at the price. This is $1,995. Now, with a camera that small, you're probably not going to be able to fix it. But how much do you pay for a maintenance kit, a parts kit for the cameras that you currently have? So we have a new paradigm that's being introduced. Maybe we don't need to cure sickness in cameras. Maybe now we just need to replace them. Here's another death that people talk about, film being dead. At the bottom left, I have an image of a poster of a movie, The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, which was the #1 movie of 2013 in terms of box office receipts. It was shot on film. So were the #5 and #9 movies. And at that same Blackmagic, one of the fancy new technology companies, they introduced a film scanner for less than $30,000, a 35mm film scanner. Here's another headline that broadcasting is dead and long live digital choice. When did that headline first appear in Convergence magazine? It was in March of 1997. Now this poster that I'm showing on the left, SDI must die, it was plastered all over the Synergy booth at NAB, but so must everything die someday. The whole universe is going to die someday. And remember, pioneers are the ones with arrows in their backs. The first 1125 total line HDTV camera in the United States, 1125 lines is still the total line standard, even though we talk about 1080 being the active lines. It was introduced in New York in 1973, and I used it then. I can tell you that anyone who created an HDTV company in 1973 is probably out of business. In fact, the people who created HDTV companies, even in the late 80s and early 90s, are out of business. Remember a few years ago when stereoscopic 3D TV was all the rage and everyone was going to have to do everything in 3D? People in the United States might remember about 30 years ago, 1983, 84, at the NAB convention, teletext was the big issue, and the question was whether we would use world system teletext or the North American broadcast teletext standard. And anyone remember the D6 system for recording HDTV on cassettes? That's a picture of a D6 recorder at the bottom right there, a very, very large device. Now, all of that said, there is something about the use of IP technology for distribution, and it may have some advantages. So this image shows a plan of a particular large mobile unit. It's All Mobile Videos Titan, which is one that I work in a lot, and it shows positions for 25 people to work there. And when I use it, we typically have maybe 40 people inside. So I'd like to give you a thought experiment. The thought experiment is if we could reduce all of the electronics in that truck to a single chip, how big would the truck be? And while you're thinking about that, let me show you something else. This was another development at NAB 2004. Ross began what they're calling their Open Truck Initiative. Now, there's a bad news and good news to this for those of you who are in the truck business. The bad news is that Ross is now in the truck business. I don't mean making trucks. I mean offering trucks for rental. So they're approaching the small market, the high school sports kind of thing. There are only positions for 6 people inside this truck, not 25 people. But on the other hand, they are making everything freely available about the truck. So all of the schematics, the plans, everything, and they will even train people. The idea is that anybody who follows this Open Truck Initiative will be able to use the same crews. The crews will know where everything is. Everything will work exactly the same way. It's something possibly of interest. So back to that thought experiment, the truck on a chip. This is my belief of exactly how big the truck on a chip would be, exactly the same size as the original truck. Because even though you've reduced the electronics to a single chip, that chip is going to run really hot, so you still need the air conditioning, and you still need all the people, and the people need all the positions and the control surfaces and the monitoring that they had previously. And this is a problem for people who are shooting sports all over, say, the United States or Europe, if you're following, let's say, FIFA. The problem is that you're shipping people around. You're shipping around directors and video operators or vision controllers, vision mixers, and so on. And that's a big transportation problem and per diem problem and so on. So a solution might be not to move the people around. Yeah, you still need to move the camera people around. You still need to have cameras at the appropriate places. But what if you kept the directors and the graphics people and so on in the same location? So on the left here, you see the one of the NBC Olympics control rooms at their facility in Stamford, Connecticut, that's controlling something that's taking place in Sochi, Russia at the recent Olympics. And on the right is something that for some reason did not show up at NAB this year, but it was at IBC last fall. It's an SDS switcher, and it's entirely IP-based. And so the control surface for the switcher was in Amsterdam, where IBC was. The electronics were in Germany, and they were using IP connections between the two. By the way, it has even more IP benefits, which is that whichever switcher, if you have a bunch of the control surfaces connected to the same electronics, whichever one needs more processing, that's the one that will keep the processing. So if you change to an entirely IP facility, you probably want to have an entirely IP routing system. And this was shown at NAB, and it's the most extraordinary routing system that has ever been shown at NAB. You can see some of the superlatives over on the left there. It deals with 46 terabits per second of switching capacity and has 2,304 ports. And at the top, I mentioned one of the other things. If you take 4 of the units, you can actually control 60,000 by 60,000 distributed routing. That's unbelievable. But why am I showing you a picture of a poster instead of showing you the actual machine? Well, it's because the actual machine was in a glass-enclosed room, which was cooled by 15 tons of air conditioning and had a tremendous amount of power going through it. And even someone from Eberts was telling me that before the show opened, they had a problem with the air conditioning and the routing started getting a little flaky. So extremely impressive development. My hat is off to Eberts. It's tremendous, but it is still on the bleeding edge. So What can you do while you're waiting for IP to stop being bleeding edge? Well, it turns out that coax still works, and I don't mean just for today's SDI, like 1.5 gigabit SDI, but 3 gigabit, 6 gigabit, and 12 gigabit SDI. This is a demonstration done by Altera of a 12 gigabit SDI connection over 60 feet of coax. Now, even that very large mobile unit that I showed you is less than 60 feet long. So you could get from one end of the mobile unit to the other in 60 feet. And Belden at the HPA Tech Retreat said that they can go even longer. They can go maybe 300 feet or something like that. And in the upper right corner, I'm just showing if you don't need a 60,000 by 60,000 router, let's say you want just 64 squared, well, those were still being shown at the show. Here's one from Envision that has 64 by 64 in just 2 rack units. So now let's look at the meaning. What is the meaning of 4K? According to the European Broadcasting Union, it means 4 degrees above absolute zero. They don't want people to use a capital K, they want them to use a lowercase k. But even if you use the lowercase k, possibilities are that you're talking 4096 by 3072, or 4096 by 2048, or 4096 by 2160, or even 3840 by 2160, which other people are calling quad HD because it's 4 times the number of pixels of 1080 line HDTV. People also sometimes call it UHD, or ultra high definition, but UHD has meaning beyond the ultra high definition. For one thing, it could mean twice as much definition in either direction, so what people are calling 8K. It can also include high frame rates, high dynamic range, wider color gamut, and immersive sound. And what is the meaning of a 4K camera? Is a single color filtered 4K sensor 4K? And people are showing cameras at NAB that have as little as 8 megapixels on the sensor to as much as about 20 megapixels on the sensor, and calling both of those 4K. So here's a new 4K camera that was shown at the show. It's from AJA. People go, AJA makes cameras? There are lots of those people make cameras. It's a 4K camera, but it uses a single color filtered sensor. And one of the things they say in their brochure is that they have an optical low-pass filter for reducing aliasing. And I have a question about that. How do you properly have an optical low-pass filter on a single sensor when there are twice as many green pixels or green sensor elements as there are red and blue? So if you're filtering for the green, your filter is going to be too tight for the red or the blue. And if you're filtering for the red or the blue, then your filter is going to be too loose for the green. And down at the bottom, I have a statement that was made at the 2008 NAB show by Peter Senton, who was then with Thomson Grass Valley, still with Grass Valley, which is now a Belden company. And he said that if the 4K cameras that were then being shown are 4K, then the Panavision Genesis and the Sony F23, which were both claimed to be only HD cameras, must be 6K cameras. Now, most of those 4K cameras and some not 4K cameras are using PL mounts. PL is a positive lock mount that was developed by ARRI for a film camera, and so there are a tremendous number of film lenses that are available to go on those cameras. But there's not a tremendous number of video lenses. So here are 2 new lenses that were shown by Fujinon at the show. At the left is one of their Cabrio Premier lenses that goes from 25 millimeters to 300 millimeters. The B4 equivalent would be a 12 by 9.8 lens, goes out to 117 in 2/3 inch. And at the right is a more video-oriented lens. It's an 18 by 5.5, goes out to 99 millimeters, and the 35 millimeter equivalent of that would be 14 to 254. Now the lens on the right is a handheld lens. The lens on the left is a little bit too heavy and large to be handheld. The lens on the right goes wider, goes almost as tight. And the lens on the left is about as tight as you can get a lens to be, a zoom lens anyway, for a PL mount camera. So that raises another question. What do we do about long zoom lenses? If you're shooting in a sports stadium or arena, or you're shooting a concert in a large venue, you're probably currently using long lenses like the one I'm showing on the left, which is a 99 by 8.4 lens from Fuji. Not a brand new introduction, they've shown that previously. Well, the S35 equivalent for that would be a 22 to 2132 zoom lens. Doesn't exist to the best of my knowledge. And also that lens was designed for high definition, so they're not too concerned about any corrections that might be necessary beyond high definition if you were shooting, say, 4K or better than that. So some manufacturers say, well, no problem, you can use that same HD lens on the 4K camera, just use one of these adapters that I'm showing you at the right. Well, if the adapter at the right is optically absolutely perfect, it's still going to have about a 2.6 stop light loss. And this particular adapter that I'm showing says that it can compensate for different color depths. Now, what do I mean by different color depths? Okay, here's a diagram of the high-definition B4 lens mount standard. It's BTA S1005A. The flange back is 48 millimeters versus 52 on PL, so there's no big deal there. But the lens manufacturers and the camera manufacturers decided that it was just too hard to make the green, the blue, and the red show up in the exact image plane. And so they have them showing up in different places and not what you would expect from optics. So the blue isn't the closest to the scene, and the green is actually closest to the scene. The blue is then the next closest, and then the red. So these adapters have to compensate for that difference in color depth. Now this is an image of what's inside a typical broadcast zoom lens. There's about 36 glass elements, and they're in 4 groups. There's a focus group, a variator group, which is what changes the magnification when you zoom, a compensator group, which is what maintains the focus as you zoom, and then a very simple relay group that simply gets the image onto the sensor. Well, that very simple relay group in this particular lens has 7 glass elements. So if you're putting a relay adapter after that to change the size to go to PL or some other kind of mount, then there's quite a bit of optical engineering that's required in that. Now, it's certainly possible to make a 4K prism camera. This was a paper that appeared in the SMPTE journal in March of 2001, and on the left is a prism-based 4K camera, and you can see it's quite large. And one of the reasons that it's quite large is the sensors were enormous. They were even bigger than an IMAX film frame. That wasn't a problem because they used a telecentric lens adapter, and at the right you can see that the modulation transfer function for this particular camera is very similar to that of film. Now, one of the tremendously exciting things that showed up at NAB this year is this, which was a prototype of a 4K camera from Grass Valley. Now, no big deal that they're coming out with a 4K camera. There are many, many manufacturers who had 4K cameras. Even Panasonic this year had a 4K camera, and PL. But what's different about the Grass Valley one, at least according to their press releases, is that when the camera comes out, it's going to be a 2/3 inch format, 3-chip prism-based camera. Now, the fact that it's 3 chips means that true 4K is possible. You don't have to worry about any losses for the color filtering on the sensor. We don't have any details on the sensor yet. And the fact that it's 2/3 inch format means that you can use those long zoom B4 lenses with no light loss from any adapter. By the way, there was also a 3-chip 2/3 inch camera shown at the 4A booth. It's from Flobel. It's the FZB3 and has ultra-high sensitivity. Now, here's another bit of a 4K issue. All 6 of these posters are from Blackmagic Design. So at the top on the left, we have their new Ursa camera. It's their latest in digital cinematography. In the middle, we have their studio camera, which I've shown you a bit about before. At the right is their Terranex converters. And then down at the bottom is their ATEM 2 Mix Effects production studio mixer, their new Smart Video Hub routers, and their Decklink cards. All 6 of those are called Ultra HD, but the ones at the top will output 12G SDI, which is what's necessary for doing 50 or 60 frames per second. And the ones at the bottom will only input 6G SDI, which allows you to do no more than 30 frames per second. So here we have a single company, and they can't even agree on what the connection standard is for Ultra HD or 4K. So now let's talk about purpose. I think that when somebody goes to the NAB show, the only purpose of what they're looking at, or something that they might be interested to buy anyway, is will it do things better? Will it make or save money? Will it help prevent losing money? Or is it just so cool and inexpensive enough that it's a must-have? So I'm showing a few examples of this here. The upper right is probably one of the ones for making or saving money or help prevent losing money. This might be, let's say you're shooting a church service or something like that. It's a tracking mount, and the woman on the right is a live woman. The woman on the left is a mannequin. There were many mannequins, and the woman was moving around the mannequins, behind them, in front of them, and the camera was always tracking where she was and wasn't confused by the fact that there were mannequins on stage. Then below that, something that was just really cool. It's from a new company in the startup area called Video Stitch, and they're taking 6 GoPro Heroes and arranging them in a cube and then stitching this into a spherical view of everything around the cube and then showing it on an Oculus Rift virtual reality headset. Then down in the middle, certainly the least expensive professional HD recorder ever. It's the Atomos Ninja Star, and its list price is just $295. And then to the left, a very small high-speed camera to 340 frames per second from Crosscast. And here's another interesting thing that was shown. This happens to be from Pivot Head. It's a pair of eyeglasses that has a 1080p HD video camera in it. It's also got GPS, gyro, recording. You can do live broadcasting and so on. And this is some similar stuff from a company called Smart Telecaster. They also allow live transmission from something that you're wearing on your head, but they recognize more of the broadcast type business, and so they have a two-way audio stream. So you can get instructions from the field or hear field questions like, so how's that fire going? Well, I'm standing next to the firefighter in my heat-resistant suit, and it's getting pretty hot in here, that sort of thing. Well, when we talk about purpose and we talk about 4K, we might want to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of 4K? Now, at the very earliest days of people talking about things like 4K, ARRI came out with this diagram that I'm showing on the left. They had come out with a scanner that had actually 6K capability, and so they were showing a cinema auditorium, and they're saying, look, even the people in the back of the auditorium can see 3K, and the people farther back than halfway can see 4K with their 20/20 vision, and the people in the first third can see 8K with their 20/20 vision, so we need to deliver something to them greater than 4K. That was before they started coming out with their own cameras, their own digital cameras. Well, the ARRI cameras are not 4K. They're not even 3K. They're less than 3K. And here are the top box office films from the year 2003. Film number 1, Catching Fire, was shot on film. Film number 2 was shot on an ARRI camera with less than 3K. Films number 3 and 4 were animated. Film number 5 was shot on film. Film number 6 was animated. Film number 7 was again shot on the ARRI camera. So there doesn't seem to be a correlation between box office and 4K. Now, maybe that's because there's a difference between shooting 4K and viewing 4K. So at the left, I'm showing 3 good reasons why you might want to shoot 4K. One is just oversampling. If you use a 4K camera to shoot for HD, you're oversampling, and that's probably entirely a good thing. Another possibility is to shoot a 4K frame, but then use that larger frame so that you can extract an HD image from it, either stabilizing motion or just panning and scanning to get to the kind of thing that you want to see in post. And you can even, if you have a large enough sensor and the appropriate lenses, do stereoscopic 3D on a single sensor, and there are some advantages to using a single sensor. Now at the right, this happens to be an 8K display rather than a 4K display. This was over in the NHK area, but it's an extremely large LCD. And notice the footprints on the floor. That's where you're supposed to stand to experience the resolution. If you actually had a living room couch there, your knees would be banging up against the cabinet that's shown. Now, here is why down conversion can be a good thing. If we simply look at the sync function, one of the most basic low-pass filters, sin x over x for sampling, if you shoot with an HD camera that has HD resolution, then it's giving you 0 contrast at 1080 lines. If you shoot with a 4K camera, then at 1080 lines you have 64% contrast. Big difference between 0 and 64%, so that's important. But this is why extraction might not be as good, at least, as the oversampling. This is a hypothetical lenses modulation transfer function, and notice in the middle I'm showing HD resolution, and in this hypothetical lens, that's very good. It's giving about 90% modulation transfer. At the far end, I'm showing 4K, and not as good down at the 4K. But if you're extracting an HD image from the 4K, and if you're using the 4K so your HD image could be zoomed in by a factor of 2, then you're down at the 4K modulation transfer function. That's probably not as good as even if you had shot in with an HD camera to begin with. Now, what about seeing stuff at home? Well, the European Broadcasting Union did some viewer tests. They used a 56-inch screen, and they had the viewers at two different distances. One is 2.7 meters or 9 feet. It's the Lechner distance, the average viewing distance. And that's the red line, by the way, of these. And then the other is at 1.5 times the picture height, which in this case is about a meter away from the screen. And you can see that there's certainly an improvement in viewing in both of those conditions for going from HD to 4K, but the amount of improvement in the case of normal viewing distances is maybe a third of a grade, and the amount of improvement for the really close viewing, about a meter away, is maybe half a grade. Neither of those is a really tremendous improvement, and the amount of increase in uncompressed data rate from either 720p 60 or 1080i 30 is a factor of 8, because from 720p you're increasing the spatial density by a factor of 8, and from 1080i first you have to deinterlace and then increase the spatial density by a factor of 4. So either way it comes to 8 times the data rate, which is not much bang for the buck. Now the main standards organization that we deal with is the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, and I just want to emphasize one part of that title. It's the M, motion. We deal with motion imagery, whether we're dealing with motion pictures or we're dealing with television. So why am I making such a fuss about that? Here are some images that appeared in BBC Research White Paper 169 that came out in September of 2008. The bottom image is the native image that was shot at 300 frames per second, and the top image is a simulation of what that would have looked like if it were shot at 50 frames per second. Now notice that the tracks and the ties have identical resolution in both of the images. But the train surely does not, because the train is moving. Now, it's not impossible to shoot movies that way. We've been shooting movies at 24 frames per second for a very long time, but we have to use some tricks to make that work, like what I call the waiter shot, where you come into a restaurant and you follow a waiter who has nothing to do with the plot in the center of the frame to the table where your protagonists are, and then the waiter leaves the frame. The reason you do that is otherwise the strobing of the background would be horrendous. So here are some other EBU viewing test results, and these were shown at IBC last fall, and this is different test content. I need to point out this was stuff with much more motion, so different from the 4K. But in this case, we have a full grade of improvement for every doubling of the frame rate. And it seems to be pretty invariant. No matter what your frame rate is, when you double it, you get a full grade of improvement. So that's a full grade for twice the data rate versus a half grade for 8 times the data rate with 4K. Now, here are some more results. These are not from the EBU because the EBU says that they want to do a bit more work. They're from the Federal Polytechnic Institute in Switzerland, but part of this paper was saying that the results were very close to what the EBU got, and these are related to high dynamic range and showing that the brightness of the display is also tremendously improving the viewing score, and this probably requires the least increase in bits per second. Now at the top I've got some high-definition reference monitoring stuff that was shown at NAB this year. Obviously I can't reproduce it properly. Neither of the pictures on top looks good. But at the left we have the 100 nits reference standard that we use today, and at the right, the 4,000 nits pulsar display that Dolby was showing as part of their Dolby Vision demonstration. But at the bottom, I'm showing a commercially available Samsung display, and that has 1,500 nit output. And then under that, I'm just mentioning that TVs typically are more than 450 nits. So what people are watching at home is already considerably brighter than the way that we are monitoring when we do our reference grading. And maybe that's not so good. Maybe we're doing some clipping that doesn't need to happen. But there is interactivity between all of these improvements. So let's start with the chart down at the bottom. You would think that by going to 4K, you're only doing an improvement over HD because you have more pixels. But in fact, if something is moving across the screen and we don't want it to be aliased, I put in here how many seconds it would take if we wanted something to be only in 1 pixel per frame as it was going across the screen. So if we take 720p resolution and 120 frames per second, it should take a little more than 10 seconds to cross the screen. On the other hand, if we take 4K resolution and we're at 24 frames per second, it takes 171 seconds to cross the screen, or almost 3 minutes. And that's obviously not so good, and so that's why we have the waitress shot. Now at the right is a diagram that appeared in the Journal of the Society for Information Display in 2011. And the red oval is basically the stuff that you want. All of the other lines that are inside the circle are visible, and those are motion aliases because of not having sufficient frame rate. So going to a higher spatial resolution should require you to go to a higher frame rate as well. But the other thing I want you to notice is notice how some of the lines are very dark and black, and some of the lines are kind of fading out. Well, that's this high dynamic range thing, and you could sort of see this in the Dolby demonstrations. They had a sequence where some cars with very shiny chrome were coming out of a dark garage, and the pictures looked wonderful. The speculars on the chrome were terrific, but there was a greater sensation of motion judder than you had in the darker one. So there's interaction with higher dynamic range too, and we probably need a higher frame rate for higher dynamic range as well. Now here's a 4K camera that was shown at the show. It's from Sony. It can only deliver 4K with an external recorder, so it was shown in the Atomos booth. It uses a color-filtered full-frame 35mm sensor. A full frame means that it's twice the size of a 35mm movie frame, but it's only 12 megapixels on that sensor, so it's called ultra-sensitive because of the large pixels, and they gave it an ISO number, or Americans may remember ASA numbers in film. Remember when you had numbers like 100, 400, if you had really high speed, that was considered 800. Well, the number on this camera is considered to be 409,600. So a quick recap on 4K. In favor, down conversion to HD, great. Reframing in post for HD, probably good, but some possibilities that there's going to be a lens MTF issue, stereoscopic 3D on one sensor, and yeah, there is an improvement at normal viewing distance on a 56-inch screen. It's a small improvement, but it does exist. Against that, they are currently less sensitive, as I showed in the previous slide. The more pixels you put on the sensor, the less sensitive it is. Someday we may be able to computationally deal with that, but not today. There are no long zooms available for the PL mount. Takes 8 times the data rate uncompressed. There's no connection standard even within a single company. And the higher frame rate is required, or you get motion aliasing. So now let's talk about society. At the right was a cute thing in the startup area. I love the name of the company. It's called Tomorrowish. But what they're offering is a social media DVR. So when you record your favorite show, you're not only recording the show, but you're also recording the comments that people made during the show, if you're one of the people who deals with that. How many people? Well, based on Nielsen and eMarketer figures here, I'm showing that maybe 1.2% of audience time is involved, but you can make a business in 1.2% of audience time. It just doesn't mean it's the majority of what's happening. People are concerned about second screen. In the picture on the left, I'm showing not only second screen, but third screen. The guy has a laptop on his lap and is also holding a smartphone in his hand. But this is not new. At the right is a picture from people watching television in the 1950s, and notice that the woman on the couch is holding a newspaper while she's watching television. But the manufacturers at NAB were socialized. The right is something that's been sent around by a director of photography in Spain. He says that this was the year that the manufacturers recognized that shooters have shoulders. So everybody had a shoulder mount camera. Almost everybody was using PL lens mounts. Almost all of the cameras had a rosette for connecting accessories. There are two standards for that, by the way, the RE standard and the RED standard, but there are adapters between them. Almost everyone was using rods for accessories. And the thing down at the bottom right, the Vocus wooden hand grip, that was found even on the Grass Valley 4K camera. By the way, even Panasonic came out with a PL mount this year, and also in going with the flow, they had ProRes compression. Now, if all the people are doing things together, well, how do they differentiate themselves? So here is the self, and one way is in sensor sizes. And here are some different imager widths. Blackmagic Design, 15.8 millimeters across, and that's Sony full-frame camera, 36 inches across. So on the right, I'm showing some different cameras. I'm not even showing the Sony over there. The yellowish image is what a Super 35 millimeter film frame would have. The bluish image is what a particular camera would have, and these are for the same focal lengths on the same lenses connected to those cameras, because everyone's saying that PL mounts are fine. Also, I should point out that depth of field is inversely proportional to imager size. Now, sometimes that's a wonderful thing if you want to separate your talent from the background if you're shooting a movie, but if you're shooting news or documentary stuff, then you want to have more depth of field. So connections are also all different, coding is different, file types are different, metadata is different, storage is different. By the way, in the middle, I'm showing a sensor from Fairchild. Very unusual that somebody would show just a sensor at the NAB show, but their optical format is 1 inch, which doesn't match anything that anybody is using in any of the cameras right now. And then back to philosophy, Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, so let's talk a little bit about supercomputing. Even the Mac Pro is up to 7 teraflops per second, and here was a computer called Dell with more teraflops in the CPU and another 14 teraflops in the GPU, and down at the bottom I'm just showing you that a Cray computer in 1998 was considered amazingly fast if it could do 1 teraflop. And again, lots of possibilities for the future. We can get to computational imaging and do high dynamic range and reframing and refocusing in post, and depth capture and increased sensitivity and up resolution and correcting lens aberrations and high frame rate in betweening, and maybe even get away from a lens entirely someday. So here is control of processing, and you could theoretically do everything from your laptop or your tablet or your smartphone, but it's not really practical in some applications. When you're doing vision mixing on a live show, you need to know what's going on right away. So this was very impressive to me in a new Panasonic show, and they have some video images of clips that you might have or something like that. Just a quick word on reality. Eutelsat had this poster that they're broadcasting more than 5,000 channels, and 500 of them are in high definition. And hint, the others are not yet 4K. Depicting reality, a lot of this is older stuff. Projectors used as monitors, LED walls as monitors. We're now down to 1.5 millimeter pixel pitch, and that was shown by Silicon Core last year in a small portion of a wall. This year they had a full wall. Goggles as monitors. Zeiss has introduced an OLED LED version, which has only 870 pixels across. And then accurate on-camera imaging, and I'll show you a little bit more on that. So here is that Atomos device with an IPS screen and 3D color lookup tables, and they also sell this device called the Spider for calibrating that screen for you. Here is the Academy Color Predictor, an app that you can enter the lighting, the filtering, and so on, and it tells you what the colors are going to be. This is a Teradek device for showing 4 pictures at a time to a director wirelessly. Now, there was, of course, religion at the show, group beliefs in the unproven, some people saying you must change to some new thing, some people saying you must never convert from some old thing, everyone agreeing that there's only one true religion, and no matter what evidence you show, it doesn't disprove the belief. And at the right, I'm showing a rectangle with a shape that's called the divine proportion, and that was proposed for HDTV. There were some opinions about the show. One person saying it was the year everything changed, another person saying it didn't have quite the buzz. Again, that depended on what religion they went into the show with. And here are some views of the show, some halls where you could fire a shotgun and not hit anybody, and then the black magic booth that was crowded all the time. This is the famous cloud, which is a religious thing. But not everybody is fundamentalist about it. So I'm sure you all use Google. You're all on this webinar, which means that you're using the cloud. But on the right is a Chromebook, which is a computer that requires the cloud. And I would suspect that very few of you use Chromebooks. It's been less than 1% of even recent sales. And there's been some testing of the faith of the cloud. You may recall Kim Dotcom's mega upload that was shut down in 2012. He may or may not have been doing something wrong, but he was accused by the US. And when they shut him down, other customers lost access to their content, even if it wasn't on his system, just servers that he was using at Carpathia or Cogent. So you want to avoid maybe using one cloud. So morality, what is good, what is evil? LED lights consume less power, but they can cause color mismatches, as I'm showing up at the top right, and high frame rate flicker. So there's a deflickering device from Crosscast. Drones inexpensively capture aerial imagery and don't put their pilots' lives at risk, but they're appropriately named because they go mee, which is the drone sound. They raise privacy concerns, and this was a near miss in Florida between a drone and a commercial airliner. There's something else that some people are considering evil. Autodesk came out with a new version of Smoke, but they are not selling it. They are only offering subscriptions. So maybe you pay $1,750 for an annual subscription, but you keep paying that for as long as you have it. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And here's another version of that. ARRI is offering license options for their Amira camera. So if you want to turn it into a premium version, you can get a temporary license key to do that. Atomos, they had some wonderful equipment at the show, but they also had these unclothed women, and they raffled off some of their equipment just before the raffle. The unclothed woman would come out. She was painted, and she would draw the winning number, and then when the raffle was over, you could hang around and have your picture taken with her. Well, here is just after the raffle was over, and you can see everybody is leaving. So I don't think that the unclothed woman even attracted people to their booth. Some modest smallness. At the upper left is a satellite antenna that does not need to be repositioned, and the car can actually drive around while communicating with the satellite. At the bottom left is a satellite antenna from SysLive that will fit into a backpack. At the top right is a wireless transmitter no bigger than a GoPro Hero. At the bottom right is a wireless receiver for camera control. In the middle, a set-top box, and that connector on the left is an HDMI connector for size, and basically you just plug the whole set-top box into the back of your TV. And at the bottom middle is a thing for tablet TV. This is the tablet TV system. You transmit from your TV station to the T-Pod, which then emits Wi-Fi so that people who have Wi-Fi devices can watch your transmission. And finally, there's this from the company NetUp. It's a remote control that has all of the keys that you need on a computer keyboard. You can even do Control-Alt-Delete on this, but is it really useful? Well, I don't know. So thank you very much, and this webinar will be available on SchubinCafe.com. And I see a question here already. Do broadcasters realize that they are being pushed into 4K by consumer manufacturers without a good visual reason compared to high frame rate? I don't know the answer to that. I certainly agree with what the questioner is suggesting. I think that high frame rate is a much better idea than going into 4K. I agree that the consumer electronics manufacturers are pushing it, but I do not have a direct line to the broadcaster minds, so I cannot answer that. Any other questions? Again, the webinar will be posted for later viewing on SchubinCafe.com. And we have a few minutes left. I will see if any other questions come in. Apparently no other questions. So thank you very much for attending. I hope you got some useful information out of this. And that was my overview.